Good morning and Merry Christmas. Merry Christmas 2022, December 25th. Yep, got a fresh coffee here and well, the weather outside is pretty crappy, so I just brought in a couple armloads of wood to keep the wood stove burning there. A little bit warmer today though, but drizzly and just kind of nasty out there. We got a lot of snow. Damaged my effing truck yesterday, which is total piss off. So, anyways, not to be deterred by the lack of viewership and likes or views or whatever, I'm going to continue to read this book, and I'm going to continue this series, I guess I could call it, now that I'm on to part 7. I found like the chapters are around, I don't know, an hour and 20 minutes it takes me to read a chapter. This one I see here is quite lengthy, so I don't know if I'll be reading that, but I'll probably go for an hour. Why not? I got nothing else to do today on Christmas Day. It's confirmed that there is no Santa Claus. That's all a bunch of bullshit. Nobody came down my chimney. Nobody left me any presents. In fact, all I got was ripped off. So, you know, the whole Christmas bullshit is just that, a pile of bullshit. Oh, on that jolly note, I've unplugged my phones, and I know I heard my cell phone just beep off there, but that's just some dumb thing, probably a like of something on Facebook or whatever. But yeah, so I'm not disturbed with phone calls, or hopefully not anyway. I know the other units phoned in there or plugged in there. So here we are again with Kevin Weeks's book, Brutal, the untold story of my life inside Whitey Bulger's Irish mob. It's been a pretty interesting read, frankly. The last chapter was about 3 murders, as you recall, if you're following along. A bloke named Barrett McIntyre and the woman famously murdered, Hussey. Yeah. I wonder if that's where that term, I mentioned that yesterday, but I don't know if anybody caught that or not. But yeah, I've heard that. Oh yeah, she's a hussy. Like a hussy is like I don't know, whore. Anyways, this is chapter 6, and it's about this guy, Steve Flemmi. He's quite famous too. You see him in the news a lot back in the day. I first met Steve Flemmi in 1974, the night he and Jimmy walked into Flicks, a downtown bar where I was bouncing. I knew Stevie's reputation as Jimmy's close associate and supposed hitman for the Winter Hill gang. He wasn't a big guy, maybe 5'8", 156 pounds. I was pretty sure he was around 40, a few years younger than Jimmy, but it was obvious that he too worked out and took good care of himself. Clean shaven, wearing jeans and a black leather jacket. Stevie had dark brown hair, neatly trimmed, and brown eyes. The press ideologically loves to call him the Rifleman. Yeah, we heard that. Referring to Roxbury's native days as a paratrooper shooter with the 187th Airborne Regimental Combat Team in the Korean War. That's hardcore, man. That's old school as it gets. My dad's a Korean War veteran, or is daddy, but whatever. But even I knew that no one close to him would ever use that inane nickname. I'd also heard a bit about his two brothers, Vincent, who had his own nickname of Jimmy the Bear, and Michael, a sergeant with the Boston Police Department. His brothers gave Michael lots of business, as the Bear's capability for violence was as legendary as Stevie's. From the first time I met Stevie, I was surprised at how likable and easygoing he was. When I started to work at Triple O's and got to know him better, he was still friendly and outgoing, a nice guy who liked to joke around, For the following 25 years that we worked together, I rarely had a problem with him and never incurred his wrath. I learned right away that his main goal was making money, which he accomplished exceptionally well, and that even though he was an intelligent, creative thinker, his first course of action toward anyone who went against him, who wasn't doing what they were supposed to do, who so much as talked to him in a way he didn't like, was to kill them. In fact, while Stevie was eventually charged with 10 murders, the correct number is more like 30. Like Jimmy, he had a violent temper and was extraordinarily brutal. But while Steve was hot-blooded, Jimmy was also cold-blooded. Stevie would kill someone anywhere, anytime. Jimmy was more calculating and took his time to pick the right place and the right moment. The badge Stevie had earned during the Korean War as a highly skilled shooter was all the more a reason to fear his hot-blooded temper. I was never afraid of Stevie, but I knew he was explosive, and I knew when to be cautious around him. When we first met in '74, Stevie had just come back from 5 years on the lam in New York and Canada with Frank Salemi. In '68, the two of them had taken off after blowing up the car of John Fitzgerald, the lawyer. So, excuse me, I'm on empty. I had a little drink of pop there. It makes me burp. After blowing up the car of John Fitzgerald, the lawyer who was representing Joe Barboza, a mob hitman who'd flipped and turned into a government witness. Fitzgerald, who Frankie and Stevie figured facilitated Barboza's flip, lost a leg in the car bombing, but survived the attack. As it turned out, Salemi got pinched in 1973 by John Connolly on a New York sidewalk, but Stevie played it safer and was able to wait it out another year until the heat died down. The case fell apart and he could safely return to Boston. There was, I later learned, more to that story, but it was many years before I understood exactly who was helping Stevie stay out of prison for that crime. Whenever we met, Stevie was living with Mary and Hussey in Milton near Curry College in a house that once belonged to his parents, but he was still legally married to Jeanette, the woman he married in the 1950s when he was a paratrooper. He had had a couple of girls with Jeanette, and he and Marion had two sons together. I only met Jeanette a few times, once in the early 1980s at Stevie's mother's house. Her blonde hair done up in a bun. She was around 5'4", a medium build and very pleasant. Jimmy, Stevie, and I were in the house when she came in to say hi to Stevie's mother, Mary. We chatted for a few minutes about nothing special, and when the three of us left, she stayed at the house to spend some more time with her mother-in-law. I'm pretty sure that a few years later, Stevie did go to Haiti for a quick divorce, but he never married Marion. Stevie and Jeanette were still married at the time of the wedding of their daughter, Jeanette, to Al Benedetti in 1983. It was an expensive wedding, done up right, with the reception at a beautiful Boston hotel, a fancy affair with open bar, lots of hors d'oeuvres, a live band, and a big crowd. All the South Boston gang, Jimmy and Stevie's inner circle, were there having a terrific time and a lot of laughs. We all brought our wives, and I was there with Pam, and Jimmy was with Teresa. Stevie looked handsome and proud, and as he and Jeanette walked their daughter down the aisle of the church, and he remained the perfect host all evening long. When Teresa Stanley's daughter Karen married hockey player Chris Nyland, the wedding at Copley Plaza was equally as lavish and Jimmy, like Stevie, spared nothing to make it so. The ceremony took place in a church, but the reception was at the hotel. There was a large crowd, which included all of the Montreal Canadiens, as well as a lot of friends and relatives, and many of Jimmy's business associates. Teresa looked especially lovely that night, as did Karen, who was every bit as beautiful as her mother. Like Stevie, Jimmy provided an open bar as well as expensive bottles of wine and Dom Perignon on every table. Karen and Chris raised their family in Hingham until they were divorced about 10 years later. Stevie loved women and was attracted to them in all shapes and sizes, so Jeanette and Marion were far from the only females in his life. A good-looking guy, he looked a little like Robert De Niro and always bought expensive clothes. He and Jimmy traveled all over Europe, Mexico, and the islands, bringing beautiful women with them. One of Stevie's favorites, of course, was Deborah Davis, whom he killed when she tried to leave him. His ego could never stand the thought of any woman leaving him. Jimmy could see a relationship end and say, "See you the fuck later." He could walk away from the woman without feeling the need to kill her in order to keep his ego intact. But Stevie couldn't do that. He couldn't just say goodbye. He had to kill her. It's funny, but people don't think criminals have women problems like everyone else, yet they do. But most criminals don't handle this stress from women the way Stevie did. You never knew what was going on in Stevie's mind. Anyone who met him couldn't help but like him, but you never knew when that nice manner was going to transform into his violent temper, which most of us, which most of 10 ended up in someone's death. Jesus, I'm stumbling over this one today, eh? Yeah, as you never knew when you were going to end up involved in his violent behavior. One morning in 1981, around 4 a.m., I got a phone call from Jimmy to meet him outside my apartment on L Street. I didn't need him to tell me that this was going to be a business call, so I dressed appropriately. Jimmy always said nighttime was the best camouflage, and it was free, just there waiting to be used. Heeding his advice, dark clothes for dark deeds, I threw on a black long sleeve t-shirt, black dungarees, black socks, black sneakers, and black leather gloves, and waited outside for him. The blue Chevy Malibu pulled up a few minutes later, with Jimmy, of course, behind the wheel and Stevie beside him. I hopped in the back and we drove in silence to Medford. Stevie looked pretty souped up and didn't say much. When we pulled up to the house of Loretta Finn, one of his current girlfriends, I said to myself, oh shit, this ain't good. Figuring we might be going to help Stevie kill her. Ugh. When Stevie got out of the car and walked into the house, I asked I asked Johnny what was up. You never know with Stevie, he answered me. He's been fighting with Loretta. She's lucky if he doesn't kill her. My thoughts exactly. Loretta was a tall girl, about 5'9", with long brown hair and big brown eyes, part Japanese. She was really gorgeous, but surprisingly, she survived the night. Less than 10 minutes later, he went into the house. Stevie came out, this time carrying a bunch of fur coats and bags of jewelry. Without a word, he threw them all into the back seat beside me, got into the front, and off we went. Jimmy dropped me off around 5, saying, get you tomorrow, as I got out of the car. It was too late to try and go back to sleep, so I stayed up and got ready for a day of work on the MBTA. But Loretta tested her luck a second time. She and Stevie were back together within a week. And one night when they were at Triple O's with Jimmy and me, she joked to us, you know, I could eat peanuts off Stevie's head. Jimmy looked at me and rolled his eyes. I knew what he was thinking. Yeah, the girl was an inch or so taller than Stevie, but that was no joking matter. Whether she realized it or not, she was insulting the guy in front of his friends. Lucky for her, Stevie was hard of hearing in one ear and hadn't heard her. But she had to be crazy or just plain stupid to have fooled around with a guy like that. People think they're joking, and it's usually okay as long as they don't try and embarrass someone. Then it isn't funny at all. It's deadly. Although Jimmy went out to dinner frequently with Stevie and his different women, the only place I ever ate was with Stevie was at his mother's house. since I was mostly in Southie and Stevie was all over Boston. We didn't see each other every day. Stevie would come over to talk business with Jimmy for an hour or so at the variety or liquor store or at the Triple O's. Then he would be on his way to do business in another part of town or whatever he wanted. The three of us did spend a good deal of time spent together in Jimmy's car, heading to a meeting or an extortion or whatever. But thanks to our caution about being taped, our conversations were always minimal and never about business or anything important. With his brilliant head for business, Stevie was easily a millionaire, investing the prestigious amounts of money he earned through illegitimate means in real estate and other legitimate businesses. To Stevie, money was God. It was important to Jimmy, but not as much as to Stevie. Stevie might have made even more money than Jimmy, since Jimmy had been in jail for 9 years, while Stevie hadn't lost a day of work. But even though both of them made a lot of money, Jimmy had no problem giving someone a break. Like if someone owed him 100,000 after he'd paid a portion of the money, Jimmy might well say, "Forget about the rest." But Stevie would never do that. Stevie would have the guy pay him dollar for dollar with no break whatsoever. Jimmy also had deep loyalty to me and to other people. Whenever possible, he would make sure to involve any of us personally or expose us to danger. Stevie was loyal, but just to a point. His loyalty went mostly to his greed, big time. Stevie was close with his sons, Billy and Stevie Jr., with whom he helped develop Schooners, a nightclub near Faneuil Hall. It opened in late December '94. Stevie had done the whole place over. He knew a lot about construction and liked to build things. He enjoyed watching the projects come together and had an eye for all the little details, paying paying careful attention to each one and making sure everything was done perfectly. One of his investments was in a laundromat in Back Bay. While he was in the process of designing and building it, Jimmy and I met him over there a couple of times, but unfortunately for Stevie, he got pinched before it reached its full potential. Although there was no doubt that Stevie had a sharp mind and handled business details exceptionally well, he was not as alert to the presence of the law as Jimmy and I were. No matter how many times Jimmy would warn him to be more cautious, Stevie just wasn't as attuned to what was going on around him as Jimmy felt he should have been. This was probably because we were always in South Boston and could recognize an unfamiliar car or face easily, while Stevie was all over Boston and had too big an area to cover. Well, that was one of the few shortcomings of his. Fuck, man. But it was a major one that eventually did him in. In 1980, Jimmy opened a garage with Stevie on Lancaster Street in downtown Boston, with which George Kaufman ran for him. for them. They often used the garage as a business office and had meetings and conducted business there. It was an indoor parking garage with many permanent spaces for cars. There was also typically inaccurate, dumb story that the newspaper printed about a scene at the garage, a story that was spread as the gospel, even though it was too ridiculous to be true. But like Jimmy always said, never let the truth get in the way of a good story. According to the local newspaper, who were quoting from an equally inaccurate police report, one afternoon, Nicky Femia, the 240-pound mob enforcer who spent most of his time at the garage, was eating his McDonald's lunch on the hood of Jimmy's black '79 Chevy Capri. The story described how Jimmy came out of the garage, saw Femia messing up his car with the food, and proceeded to humiliate him by flinging French fries into his face and screaming at him in front of a small crowd. The story is too ridiculous to repeat, and even more ridiculous to have ever happened. In the first place, Jimmy never acted like that to any of his associates. Second of all, Nicky was a very dangerous guy, and if Jimmy had ever humiliated him in front of the others in that manner, Femia would be looking for revenge, and Jimmy would have had to kill him. Just another example of inaccurate reporting and distortions of the truth about Jimmy. The garage was the real setting. However, for some of Stevie's best jokes, I used to call him Judd for the defense, referring to 1967 and a '69 ABC television show about a flamboyant lawyer named Clinton Judd, because every time Stevie tried to stick up for me, he'd get me in more hot water with Jimmy. Even if it was a dead issue, everything I had already done that had gotten Jimmy annoyed, Stevie would try to stir it up all over again. He'd get such a kick out of seeing Jimmy get on me. I should have eaten something today, I guess. Like with the paintball tournaments, Stevie was so how was that? So how was that paintball convention last weekend, Kev? He'd asked me days after Jimmy had gone at me for taking off for Texas for a tournament. Where exactly did you say you went? I heard you did real well. Jimmy would start at me all over again, and Stevie would stand in back of him, facing me, barely able to conceal his laughter. There was nothing mean-spirited about what Stevie was doing when he brought up my paintball tournaments. He was doing it all in fun. But all I knew was that every time Judd for the defense stuck up for me in any matter, I always ended up getting convicted. Hey, do me a favor and quit sticking up for me, I'd tell him. But he would just smile and keep on busting my balls. In his typical joking manner, Stevie had tried to convince me to take care of a cat, McTavish, that he had over at the garage. I had never seen such an ugly cat. First of all, it was the size of a dog, and it was missing an ear, which it had lost in a fight, along with large chunks of its fur. The dirty street cat was all scarred up and would attack anything that came within 5 feet of its broken tail. Come on, Kev, Stevie was always going on at me, laughing as he was talking, unable to keep a straight face. This cat loves you. It would be perfect for your kids. They'd love it. Come on, take him home for a few days. He needs a good home. Give him a try. Oh, yeah, I told him. He'd be great with my boy. It's just the perfect family pet. I'll come home one night and find the cat grazing on my kid's arm. But he never gave up pulling my leg about that miserable cat. Stevie never ran out of jokes, mostly off-color jokes, a lot of which he got from George Kaufman, an old Winter Hill associate of his. Stevie was a great joke teller and got Jimmy to laugh at most of his jokes, but he had his own passion, which wasn't for paintball competitions, but rather for parachuting. He joined the International Association of Airborne Veterans, and with other former paratroopers, he jumped from planes in South Africa, East Germany, Israel, Russia, and Thailand, forming friendships with other Korean War veterans. Sounds like me. He enjoyed the jumps and was always commenting about how modern the equipment was now as compared to what he had used during the war. Wow, if he jumped in combat during Vietnam or during Korea. He would describe the different types of parachutes the Army used and how they had improved over the years. Once, when he was talking about his experiences during the Korean War, he told me and Jimmy how he could look from one mountaintop to the other and see the faces of the people who he was shooting at. But most of his reminiscing about those days took place at the reunions with other veterans that he attended faithfully, making jumps right up until the 1990s. That's cool, man. Respect to this guy for that, at least. Even though he's a stone cold killer, man, and a friggin' nut. Stevie was close with his parents, who had both emigrated from Italy to the United States before he was born. He took good care of them, buying them houses and cars and whatever else they needed. His father, John, was a quiet guy, old school, who spoke broken English. He had served in World War I with the Italian army and had been a bricklayer in the old country, but there was still plenty of spirit in him. When John was 92, Stevie couldn't find him one day, so Jimmy and I took off looking for him. About a half hour later, we found him outside his house. He was sitting on the roof, which had a severe slant to it, quietly watching the roofers working on the other side of his house. When Stevie looked up and saw him up there, he muttered, "Jesus Christ," in amazement. The three of us watched, not saying a word, until when he was ready, John got down by himself. A couple of years later, he told everyone he was planning to go to Italy by himself. Sure enough, a month later, he took off for Italy and stayed there for about a month, having himself a great time until he decided it was time to come home. Stevie's mother, Mary, was a terrible little lady, one of the world's sweetest. Oh, terrific. How did I say terrible? See, like you see words like Stevie's mother, Mary, was a terrific little lady, one of the world's sweetest. Her greatest joy was cooking for her sons and their friends. Stevie had brought bought his folks a single family home in Milton, but later moved them to Southie, where they lived next to Billy Bulger. It was here where Stevie murdered Deborah Davis, but it was also here in her kitchen that Mary happily cooked so often for Jimmy and Stevie and me, serving us delicious Italian specialties from large pots simmering on her stove. Jimmy did tell me that Marion wasn't nice to Stevie's parents, and I could never understand that. When Stevie's brother Jimmy the Bear died of a heroin overdose while serving a life sentence at MCI Norfolk for the murder of Francis Benjamin, Jimmy and I went to the wake. While we were viewing his brother lying in his casket, Stevie was standing there with his mother and father and Michael. Mary went over to Jimmy and said, crying, "Vincent was such a good boy. He never hurt anyone." Stevie looked at her and said, "Stop, Ma. He killed everyone." Stevie was right. Jimmy the Bear was an extremely violent man, and at Barbosa's and as Barbosa's partner, had been involved in the Boston gang wars of the 1960s. The murder of Francis Benjamin, for which the Bear had gotten the life sentence, was a particularly ugly one. After he'd shot Benjamin in the head using a gun that belonged to a cop, the Bear had cut off the head to avoid any ballistics evidence tracing the gun to the crime. But they fingered him anyhow. But Stevie had his own unique streak of violence. As I started to work more with him, I'd see him explode at people who owed him money or didn't do what he wanted or what they asked him to do. He'd asked them to do. He started to berating them, screaming at them, and I'd just watch. Jimmy, Stevie, and I never tried to calm one another down in a scene like that. We'd never embarrass one another by showing any division in public. If someone had to be said about in an incident, something had to be said about something, an incident like that, it was said in private when the three of us were alone. There were times when one of us would play the good guy and the other would play the bad guy, assuring the guy in the mess that we tried to work things out. But the only way things could ever be worked out was for the guy to do exactly what Stevie wanted. Stevie rarely had to work hard convincing someone to do what he wanted. His reputation preceded him. Like Jimmy, Stevie kept himself looking good by eating healthy, working out, working out nearly every day in his own house, where he had weights and did calisthenics. He maintained vigorous exercise workouts because he felt the young guys were always sizing him up, and he didn't want to appear out of shape to them. Like Jimmy, Stevie felt that if you look for formidable, there is less chance that people will challenge you. Stevie had a juice machine where he made himself all sorts of weird concoctions out of fruits and vegetables. He even brought me my own juice machine, which I used for a while. When I saw how hard it was to clean out every time I used it, I stopped using it. But Stevie never gave up on his side, or up on his. He was always big on vitamins, which he kept in his mother's house and tried to convince me to use. Occasionally I would take them, but never as faithfully as Stevie. Like Jimmy, Stevie bought most of his food at the health food store, bread and circus, and didn't smoke, gamble, do drugs, or drink much. All three of us were big readers and talked about the different books we read. Like Jimmy, Stevie particularly liked books about World War II or Korea or Vietnam. He was close with his kids, especially his two sons, Billy and Stevie. Although the like Jimmy, boring you. Although like Jimmy, he wasn't big on professional sporting events. He made it to most of Billy's wrestling matches. Stevie Jr. ended up straight, but even though Stevie didn't even want his kids involved in crime, Billy got mixed up in some criminal activities. It's sort of interesting that the Italian mob most often replicates and goes on and on with family members joining, but the Irish gangs seem to last just one generation per family. Stevie and I certainly didn't work anywhere near as closely as Jimmy and I did, and we never ran in the same social circles. Like Jimmy and most of the guys, he didn't bring a woman to my wedding, but had a great time. He always acted respectful and friendly to Pam and the boys, like a regular friend. He was concerned with anything that came up in my life and offered to help in any way if he could. Jimmy trusted Stevie, but he always said that he never knew what Stevie was thinking. Merry Christmas. The two of them had respect for each other, and even though they might have had disagreements, they were never heated. It would have been dangerous for them to have uh, cross words with each other. On a typical day, Jimmy and I would spend an hour a day with Stevie, walking around doing business. I mean, we weren't doing crimes every day. We weren't animals, and except for the business aspects of our lives, we led boring, regular lives. But depending on what was going on, if we had uh, an extortion or were collecting tribute for established rackets, we'd spend more time together. Stevie was exceptionally smart business wise, paying attention to all aspects of business and always staying on top of things. I have little doubt that Stevie could have been successful at anything he tried to do. If he'd gone legit, he could have easily figured out how to let his excessive greed work for him, having people work for him and make him rich. But crime was his field, and he did it brilliantly. He was a master criminal involved in all aspects of crime, in loan sharking, drug dealing, extortion, everything. I never realized till uh, much later just how good he was at what he did, how adept he was at working both sides. Like all big time criminals, Stevie was involved in a network with other criminals, all facets of crime. E- Everyone he dealt with was a criminal to one degree or another. Even legitimate people who were around him were like groupies, people who wanted to be able to tell others they knew this guy or were connected to him, no matter what it cost them to be able to do that. They found it advantageous just being able to say that Stevie was a friend of theirs. That went for Jimmy too. These wannabes thought that they could ask Jimmy or Stevie for a favor at any time. They wanted to be able to somehow say they knew wise guys, that they had friends who would do anything. I still don't know why legitimate people feel that way about wise guys. Maybe it's for the same reason, whatever it might be, that girls want to be around rock stars. While Stevie and I spent most of our time together with Jimmy, the two of us, the two of us did handle a few situations together. One involved the transfer of guns from the from the hide in George Kaufman's house in Brookline. It was a move that it was a move made necessary when George, a terrible guy who became our liaison with the Jewish bookmakers, said sold his house in Brookline. So we decided to move our weapons gathered from years before the Brookline to Stevie's mother's house in South Boston. Before the move, Jimmy, Stevie, and I spent a lot of time checking weather reports, waiting until we heard a report about a rainy night when not too many people would be out and about, since those who were out would be hidden under umbrellas or looking down, trying to get out of the rain as quickly as possible. It would be easier for us not to draw any attention on that type of night. Once we got the weather, once we got the weather we wanted, I took off from George's house, and around 9:30 or 9 p.m., backed my car into the garage underneath his uh, his house. After George and I walked into the basement off the garage where the hide was, George took a putty knife and slid it uh, down the hall between the molding to a spot where it touched the two copper nails with wires attached to them that were sticking out. As soon as the putty knife hit the rails, it made a connection, and I heard a motor turning over. As George and I walked out of the room, I saw that the wall had been on a track. Not the other side of the house opened. Now the other side of the house opened up, and we could see the hide. The two of us spent the next hour taking all the weapons out of the hide and packing them into the 5 duffel bags I had brought with me. We were always acquiring guns and had stashed others in different houses, but it was certainly time to get them out of George's house. It wouldn't have been great for the new owners to have somehow moved the wall and discovered more than 200 guns in his new home. Weapons were out of tools of the weapons were our tools of the trade, and we needed easy and constant access to them. We had to be prepared for anything that night or that might come up. Obviously, we needed different weapons for different tasks. Each need to depending on the setting. For instance, if we were going car to car, we might need an assault weapon or a carbine machine gun with a silencer. Or if we were going after someone on foot, we'd need a pistol with a silencer. This arsenal had all of these weapons, plus hand grenades, AK-47s, Thompsons, and 9mm submachine guns, bulletproof vests, and C4 explosives, all with .25, 32, 38, 45s, ski masks, holsters, walkie-talkies, and handcuffs, and boxes of ammunition for every caliber of gun there. More weapons than we could possibly use in a lifetime. Some we wanted to have with us if we were doing something. Perhaps a hand grenade, just in case we might need it. Fucking tell you, it's not easy reading, man. Tend to lose your concentration. My thoughts tend to drift to things that are bothering me too. But that's why I'm reading, is to take my mind off the things that bother me. Jimmy, Stevie, and I, of course, knew how to use everything in this arsenal of weapons. We'd picked up a piece of here or there, maybe from somebody selling one. They were often guns from robberies, stolen guns. It was never hard to get guns, since people were always wanting to sell them. And Jimmy, Stevie, and I took good care of ours, going down to our various hides once a month to clean the weapons and make sure they were functional. Since we were criminals dealing with violent crimes, it wouldn't have done much good for one of us to have walked up to someone with a fly swatter and said, "Give me your money." Or, of course, not every criminal needs a weapon to commit his crime. White-collar crimes like WorldCom CEO Bernard Embers or Andrew Fastow of Enron use a pen or a computer, not a gun, to steal someone's money. At least our weapons were easy to identify, and there was nothing underhanded about our crimes. You know, when you knew when you were being robbed. Anyhow, when George and I were through putting the duffel bags into my trunk, we went back into the house, made the connections again, and watched as the wall closed itself up. Then I drove to Stevie's mother's house in South Boston and backed the car into the driveway. In the rain, Stevie was waiting for me on the other side of the fence. I took the duffel bags out and passed them one at a time over the fence to Stevie, who carried each heavy bag into the screen house where he had built his own hide. The screen house was a separate building constructed in the yard with sliding glass doors that could open to let in the air while keeping out the insects. Here people could come out to relax. Ironically, it was constructed by Richie Buccieri, the same man we shook down for $200,000 for putting a fence on my property. It had marble tiled floors, along with a bar, a kitchen, and a bathroom. The hide was in one of the walls. There were clips that attached to the interior wall so that if you knew where to pull on the outer wall, the clips let go and the wall would open up. Around 11, when I was through with my part of the maneuver, I said goodnight to Stevie and headed home. The whole deal had taken maybe 2 hours from start to finish, and no one had noticed a thing. Stevie and I also worked well together when one of us was involved in any sort of fight. For instance, one afternoon, the two of us were down at the variety store when I got a call from the Fitzy, Steve Fitzpatrick, the bartender at Triple O's. Fitzy wanted to tell me that some guy named Tommy McClure was demanding I come to the bar so he could show everyone I wasn't as tough as I thought I was. he was giving the bartender a hard time, pulling money off the bar and being a complete asshole. Stevie was even more excited than I was when I told him that what Fitzy had said, and he was in his car heading to Triple O's before I could get into mine. When he got into the bar, Stevie headed for the back door, and I walked in the front door and stood where I usually did. Tommy was standing in the middle of the bar shouting to Fitzy, "I told you to get him down here," as Fitzy glanced at me. Tommy saw me. Tommy McClure was a redhead, 5'11", maybe 190 pounds, with a medium build. I had my hands on the bar and was looking nonchalantly around the room. As Tommy turned the corner and started to uh, approach me to say something, I lifted my hands and hit him. Tommy fell hard against the window, where I proceeded to beat on him. In less than a minute, I had split him open and broken his ribs. This time, this time, this time he had showed uh, how tough he was by hitting the floor and pissing and shitting himself as he went down. I was still going at him when Stevie grabbed me off him. "You're going to kill him," he told me, pulling me away from the guy. That was pretty strange coming from Stevie, who most likely uh, who would most likely have a shot at him in the head with the minute he who most likely would have shot him in the head the minute he walked into the bar. Uh, but when Stevie let go of me, I saw that the kid's face was soaked with blood, while his pants were sopping with shit and urine. Not a pretty sight, and any any way you looked at him. But I was through with him. Yeah, I saw no reason to kill him. I just wanted to give him a beating, and I did. Outside the bar, a cable crew was digging up the road to lay new cable, and a cop was standing near the crew. The real tough guy who had wanted so badly to fight me staggered over to the cop and tried to tell him what had happened. The cop took one look at Tommy, saw the piss and shit, figured he was drunk and disgusted, told him to get away from him. Somehow, Tommy pulled his stinking, bloody body away from the street. About 6 hours later, I noticed that my left hand had blown up, and two red lines were moving up my left arm. I drove over to the New England Medical Center, where an emergency room doctor examined me. It only took a few minutes to see that when I hit the tough guy a left hook, I had knocked out one of his teeth, which then pierced my finger. The doctor didn't hesitate, explaining that I had blood poisoning from Tommy's tooth, where it had entered my finger. He wrapped a rubber tourniquet around my arm and rushed me into an operating room to excise and drain an abscess where the tooth had gone into my knuckle and my ring finger and affected my entire arm. I ended up staying in the hospital for 3 days on intravenous antibiotics after I was confined to my house for another 7 days with a heparin lock inserted into my hand to administer IV antibiotics 3 times a day. Pam took one look at me when I got home from the hospital and said, now you tell me who won the fight. Yeah, no kidding, eh? 2 weeks later, I walked into the liquor store to go see Bo McIntyre, a friend of mine, and immediately spotted my buddy Tommy holding a case of beer. He handed the beer to his friends and said to me, "We have something to finish." I nodded, hit him in the forehead with a right hand, and split him wide open. He also suffered a concussion. Bo McIntyre turned and looked at me and said, "What are these people thinking have when they challenge you? Do do they really think you're going to walk away? They're all nuts. What would make someone want to fight you?" "I don't know, Bo," I said as I watched Tommy's friend carry him out of the store. This time he was the one going to the hospital. I happened to run into Tommy a year later and figured, here we go again. But he came up to me, stuck out his hand, and said, "I'm sorry, I was wrong." I shook his hand, and we actually became good friends after that. You might say we became blood brothers, even. While Stevie did attempt to end the fight and save a life, most often he was joining in and trying to accelerate the bloodshed. Like the night he pulled up to the liquor store and at just the right time. I'd been there with a friend named Brian Feeney uh, when two 17-year-old girls dressed in spandex pants and halter tops came in to buy tonic and cigarettes. As they were walking in, a group of college kids from Weymouth who had just come from the medieval manor restaurant drove by in a car and a pickup truck. As soon as they spotted the girls, they started leaning out their windows, whistling at the young ladies. They weren't saying anything lewd, so I just ignored them and took care of the girls. But as they started to walk out, the girls became raunchy and began yelling sexual things to them. I walked to the door and said, "Get out of here." A couple of the guys yelled back, "Who are you?" I own the place," I told them. "Well, fuck you," one of the kids told me, getting out of the car. Here we go again for him, eh? Well, we're going to nail this. Not too bad. Fuck me, I asked, and walked over to the car and hit him before his uh, feet touched the sidewalk. As he went down, the car and truck quickly emptied as his friends came to his rescue. Just at that moment, Stevie pulled up in his car and jumped out in a flash. He had hit one kid and knocked him out cold. As Brian ran out of the store and started to fight another kid, while Stevie and Brian were at work, I hit two more and they went right out. The remaining two took off running. A week later, thanks to two Boston cops, Bob Ryan and Joseph Lundholm, uh, whose relative had a problem with me, I found myself in court in Southie with my lawyer, Bill Crow. Lundblom had gone to the kids in Weymouth and told them I was a gangster and an organized crime, urging them to press charges to protect themselves, which they did. Four of them showed up at the courthouse, and before we went on, they told me that for $5,000 each, they would drop the charges. I told them I was filing charges against them. Inside the courthouse, my lawyer told me if I paid $5,000 to each of the four kids and also paid for their medical charges, they'd drop the case. I couldn't care less whether they get paid or you get paid, I told them, but there is no way everyone is going to get paid. Fine, he said. We're going to court. When we had our hearings for probable cause, the judge listened to everyone's story. Then he turned to me and said, Mr. Weeks, there were 7 of them. How did you fight 7 people? Even though Stevie and Brian were involved, I was the only one who was charged. It was me they pointed the finger at because the liquor store was in my name. Your Honor, I surrounded them, I told him. He started laughing and said, I'll tell you what, I'm going to find you all guilty or else I'm going to dismiss the whole case. The kids suddenly understood that that meant they would have records. I'm studying law and I go to USC, which in the University of Southern California, one kid started to explain to him, obviously worried that having a record would hurt a future legal career. The judge interrupted him saying, I know that USC stands what USC stands for, son. Then he turned to me and said, what do you want to do, Mr. Weeks? Doesn't matter to me, I said. I work for myself, so I can't get fired. I wasn't going to be the one to end this thing. It didn't bother me one way or another. The judge looked at the kids and said, well, the choice is yours. What do you want to do? We'll drop the charges, one of them said, and they all nodded in agreement. There were numerous times of course, when Stevie took matters into his own hands and handled the situation by himself. One afternoon, Stevie was heading to the escalator at the Prudential Center when he bumped into a kid in his 20s. Stevie said, excuse me, and the kid said something smart to him, concluding with, fuck you. With the crowd watching, Stevie then proceeded to beat the shit out of the kid. Right afterward, when Jimmy and I met Stevie, who was easily twice as old as the kid, he looked just fine, not the least bit disheveled. He didn't have a scratch on him. The 3 of us took a ride back to the Prudential looking for the kid and his friends. Lucky for them, we didn't find them. A couple of the other guys got off lucky too, especially when they got into situations they didn't expect involving the 3 of us. One night in February of 1984, after Jimmy, Stevie, and I bought the liquor store, the 3 of us were in the store when 2 black kids pulled up in their car. They walked into the store, looked around, and then walked out. Once they were outside, they got into their car, turned it around so it was facing out, and went and bent the license plate so no one could read it. At that time, Stevie and I were talking in the front of the store, and Jimmy was upstairs in the office. When we saw what the 2 kids were doing, Stevie asked me if I had a pistol. I said, yeah, I have a 45 on me and a 44 Bulldog under the counter. When I was giving the 44 to Stevie, Jimmy walked downstairs and said, what's going on? We told him the 2 black kids had come in, then turned their car around and bent the plate. He nodded and walked back up to the 2nd floor and the office. A few minutes later, the 2 kids came back in and walked down the middle of the aisle of the store. One of them had his hands in his coat pocket, and I could see the point of a pistol pushing out of the pocket. I was standing next to the counter, and Stevie was by the door. Both of us had our pistols behind our backs. When the two kids came up front, they looked at us, and I pulled the hammer back on the pistol behind my back. At the same time, upstairs, Jimmy slid opened the sliding glass door, which was the two-way mirror, and stuck the Mini Ruger with a 30-round clip in it out the window. A few seconds later, he snapped the bolt and was looking down the barrel at the kids. When they turned around, they looked up at the gun pointing out the window, right at the two of them. They looked at me and Stevie, who were starting to laugh. Finally, they looked at each other, and one of them said, "I guess we're gonna be, I guess we be going." And without another word, they were out the door in their car and driving away. Jimmy came down, and the three of us were laughing about the whole scene. When we started talking about it, I said, "How would I have explained that or this, since the three weapons were all registered to me? I mean, they got shot from the right with the 45, from the left with the 44, and from the above with the Mini Ruger." "You were fast," Jimmy said, "real fast. Right up until the last time I ever saw Stevie, I never knew exactly what was going on in his mind. Smart, fearless, good-natured, funny, violent, dangerous. He was all of those things. But there was a piece to the puzzle that was Stevie that I didn't fit into the whole picture until the spring of 1997, when I learned about his relationship with the FBI. Then he became a bit clearer to me, or as clear as Steve Flemmi could ever be to another person. Well, that's it. 1 hour and 12 minutes, almost an hour and 13 minutes. That was chapter 6. It was a pretty good read, man. That was pretty interesting. I felt confident reading it. Didn't have to stumble over my words too much. I just wanted to see. Anyways, yeah, that's my Christmas day here. Reading my book to nobody. I did see one person was on there. Okay, yes. No, that wasn't chat. That was